Welcome to the Know Your Ship podcast, presented by eHub. I'm your host, Frank Dolce. You guys are in for a treat. Unfortunately, several of you in the room were not born when all of this was occurring. I was in college when this was happening with the war on drugs in America and the Colombian cartels. It's a fascinating story. And there are lots of resources if you want to go listen to it afterwards. But you have the number one resource here with us today on a live broadcast of the Know Your Ship podcast. You're sitting in the midst of a living legend. I'm not kidding. That is absolutely true. This is the man who is the head of the DEA in Colombia, who took down the most notorious drug trafficker of all time, Pablo Escobar. This is the one and only Joe Toft.
I'm going to have a very hard time living up to that introduction.
Yes. I said living legend, and everyone thought I was talking about myself, but it was you. It was you this time. I'm going to read a few facts about Pablo Escobar because I don't want to forget any of these things. He was also known as the king of cocaine, one of the most notorious criminal terrorists in the history of the world. DEA agent Mike Vigil said Osama bin Laden was a choir boy in comparison to Pablo Escobar. A life meant absolutely nothing to him. One of Joe's partners, Kenny McKee, said Al Capone, who we think of as a notorious gangster in the United States, would have been nothing more than a driver for Pablo Escobar. At the pinnacle of his reign of terror, Escobar controlled over 80% of the cocaine shipped into the United States. He had several labs throughout the jungles in Colombia, each capable of producing thousands of kilos of cocaine per week. And just so you have an idea, 1 kilo of cocaine would sell on the street in the United States for $60,000 or more. The cartel was netting about $420 million per week. At the time, Escobar had a net worth of approximately $30 billion. He was listed on the Forbes wealthiest people in the world at number 7. He owned a 20,000 square kilometer estate that he built with several man-made lakes, a collection of luxury cars and bikes, a private bull ring, sculptures of dinosaurs, and a zoo that still exists with elephants, giraffes, hippos, ostriches, and exotic birds. I know Colton would be excited about that because he'd like to go hunt all of those things. The hippos are still prevalent and, in fact, in some ways overrunning the Colombian countryside. To avoid extradition to the U.S., he built his own luxury prison called La Catedral, staffed by his own employees, which included a soccer field, a bar, a hot tub, and a dance club. And notoriously, he invited a couple people, Joe will talk about this, to the prison where he assassinated those people. He tried to position himself as a modern-day Robin Hood. He sponsored many social programs for underprivileged. He built roads, electric lines, soccer fields, housing, and hospitals in the poorest neighborhoods in Medellin. He was a ruthless killer. He assassinated, or had assassinated, 3 Colombian presidential candidates. The Attorney General of Colombia. He kidnapped the entire Supreme Court and killed at least 3 of the members. Scores of judges, more than 1,000 police officers, a sitting cabinet member, journalists, civil servants. In 1989, he suspected that a presidential candidate, Cesar Trujillo, would be on a flight out of Colombia, Avianca Flight 203. He blew up the flight, killing 107 people on board. Trujillo was never on the flight. 9 days later, more than 50 were killed and over 2,200 injured when he detonated a truck outside of the Administrative Department of Security headquarters building in Bogota. That was the individual that you decided to go and hunt down. I'm just curious. Why did you want to do that?
Well, excuse me. I didn't decide that. The government decided. The U.S. government decided. So I was just lucky enough to be at the right place in the right time, and I got selected to go to Colombia with the mission of hunting down Pablo Escobar and doing away with the Medellin cartel. When I left for Colombia, I thought I was very well prepared. I had studied Escobar, read every file that the DEA had on Escobar and the Medellin cartel, studied about Colombia, history, customs, etc. And I went to Colombia pretty confident that I could get this guy probably in less than a year. It was a 3-year assignment that I went to. But due to corruption in Colombia and the fact that he basically owned everybody, the corruption reached the presidential palace. The military was in his pocket. A good portion of the Colombian cops were in his pocket. Every time we located him and we ran an operation, when I say we ran an operation, we didn't have police powers in Colombia because we were Americans, guests of the Colombian government. So our role was basically to provide the Colombian police with advice, intelligence, and help them locate and run operations against Escobar. But every time we had an operation, it was negated by the fact that Escobar got a tip from the authorities prior to our arriving at the location. So this hunt went on I was there for almost 7 years, and the hunt for Escobar took nearly 6 years.
So part of his strategy was to build this network of informants, and he did that with the social programs and helping out the poor and providing food and money and housing, and in fact had all of those people had an opportunity to tell somebody in the cartel if they spotted something, if they saw something. So he kept himself out of trouble by this incredible information network that he built.
He built an incredible network with the poor. Every cab driver in Medellin had a number they could call if an American showed up in Medellin. And so every time that my agents were spotted in Medellin, Escobar got a phone call to be alert. We had, at times we had as many as, actually more than 100 wiretaps going on at the same time in Colombia. Most of them with the Medellin cartel, some with the Cali cartel. And the corruption, even in the wiretap rooms, he knew about conversations that were being intercepted about him or his colleagues before we did. So it was a rough road. It was extremely difficult.
And the corruption, part of the issue that you faced is that the government was either uninterested or afraid of going after Escobar because the corruption rose to the highest levels of the government, including the presidential cabinet.
Absolutely. The big obstacle was corruption. However, another obstacle was that he established a reputation of carrying out his threats. And it didn't matter who the target was, the attorney general, a presidential candidate, the chief of police, whoever, he killed them. And so Colombia, all the way to the president. I mean, the president of Colombia was afraid of Escobar. President Gaviria, in my opinion, did not act against him. They would not provide the support for the police to go after him to the degree that it would have enhanced the chance of capturing him for fear. And yeah, it was an extraordinary situation.
So you're the head of the DEA operation in Colombia, and you're coordinating with local police, with the CIA, with the military as well?
Yes.
How difficult, with all of the corruption, how difficult was it to run an operation like that against someone who is so feared in the country?
Extremely difficult. The main obstacle, again, was the local authorities. I felt that if I had the autonomy to run my operations with DEA personnel, it would have been, I don't want to say a piece of cake, but it would have, we would have been able to get Escobar a lot sooner. But the minute, the thing I want to explain, I don't want to create the picture that every Colombian cop was corrupt. Some of the greatest, bravest cops that I've worked with through my nearly 30-year career were Colombian cops that would not be corrupted. And many of them paid a price. They were killed or their families were targeted. And even with those threats, those daily threats, they stood up to Escobar. And those are the people we trusted. Those are the people that we shared our intelligence with. But they had to rely on others to run the operations. They had to bring in others. And that's where the corruption took place.
In organizing that operation and trying to track him down, what were some of the things that you did? How did you coordinate with the local police? What was the technology that you used? How did you organize all of these vast resources to try and hunt him down?
Well, we had a lot of resources. At one point, we actually got the Delta Force to come to the country. This is after Escobar escaped from his prison. And the same unit led by, at the time, Colonel Boykin, who I'm a great admirer of the colonel. He was promoted to general, now he's retired. But that was the same unit that worked on the Black Hawk Down, the book that was written by Mark Bowden. And so we had it was a complicated thing because there are a lot of turf wars, too, between the agencies. So the CIA would not normally share with us everything they had. We did the same thing with them. The police was always a big question mark because we knew that 95%, there was a 95% chance of anything that we gave the police that would be compromised. We ran, I said, we knew where Escobar was dozens of times, but that information is very time sensitive. So you don't have time to sit down and, plan an operation to carry out in 2 days. You have to react. You have to immediately react because Escobar never stayed in the same place for very long. He was always moving, usually no more than a day or two at any one place. So consequently, as soon as we got the information of where he was, we would go to the police. We would give them the information. They would create a group to target that location where he was at. And even though it was a matter of hours, by the time we got there, we learned that Escobar had escaped 2 hours before or an hour before. Sometimes his food was still warm, it was extremely frustrating and very challenging and very difficult.
So you at one point you mentioned the prison, which I think is a fascinating story, and I'm going to let you tell that. But at one point you're kind of closing in on Escobar, and he turns himself in to the Colombian government to avoid extradition to the United States, which I think he feared most of all?
The only thing that Escobar really feared was extradition to the United States. The only law enforcement that he really feared was DEA. And he was, through his campaign of terror in Colombia, where, like I said, he intimidated the population, the agencies, the military, the police, all the way to the presidency. He was able to create a situation where he made specific demands regarding his turning himself in. And some of his demands were that he be allowed to turn himself into his own prison, a prison that he had built, that he was allowed to pick the security people for the prison, that he was allowed not to have law enforcement within 2 kilometers of the prison, that he was allowed to plead guilty to 1 count of drug trafficking, and nothing to do with the murders and the thousands of people that he killed and kidnapped. And President Gaviria, out of weakness and out of fear, gave in to all these demands and let him walk into his own prison where he continued operations. And we all knew, we have intelligence of everything that was going on in the prison. And we had informants, we had, the people were telling us about Escobar going in and out of the prison whenever he wanted to attend parties. They had orgies at the prison. They bring in all the prostitutes. It was unbelievable. He had a discotheque built in the prison, So, and all of this information was being relayed all the way to the presidency. And it was shared with the police, and the police, some of the information came from the police, the people we trusted. But the president kept denying this was going on until he finally killed some of his own colleagues that were allegedly cheating him out of some money or some cocaine. And he was forced to try and move Escobar, at which point Escobar escaped.
So I want to go back a little bit. There's a few things in that story that I'd like to touch on. One is, so the police force, there was corruption throughout the police force, but it wasn't just that the police force was being bribed. Families of the police force were also being intimidated. And that was something, they say the silver or the lead. Can you explain a little bit about what that means, the silver or the lead?
Basically, Escobar would approach someone in authority in the government, not only police, but he would approach politicians, whatever, and offer them a briefcase full of money and say, hey, this is for you. And basically what that was doing, that individual owed Escobar a favor. That might happen 6 months from then or whenever Escobar needed it. And if you refuse that, then he says, okay, then the alternative's lead. And he carried out this threat constantly. And that's how he created this intimidating force that was so difficult to deal with. And that's why I admire a lot of the cops that I work with that refused the money.
This is the local, the Colombian police force.
The Colombian police. And I have still a lot of friends up there that just refuse the money and a lot of them pay the price.
And one thing that you said is you were in an interesting circumstance in your life that allowed you to take on this role. And you were excited to go and do that. But someone asked, if you were a Colombian police officer, would you have done that? And your answer is?
As you're sitting out there, and one of the things that I have a really difficult time was you're asking these cops to do the work that you would normally be doing in the United States, carrying out the operations and everything. And and these guys are getting killed. And it's really difficult to sleep knowing that that's taking place. And if I was in their shoes and people were threatening me and knowing that they are going to carry out that threat, not that anybody's going to protect my family, knowing that they are going to carry out that threat, I don't know if I'd have that courage to say no. You know, it's hard for an American to understand that in law enforcement in the United States. I've been working for the DEA in the United States and other places. I've been, you know, in a situation where people make threats. You know, I'm going to get you when I get out of prison. Yeah, you listen to it, but you're not really afraid. And 99% of the time, you don't have a thing to worry about. But in Colombia, Escobar made sure that if he threatened you, he carried out, because that's how he built his reputation, that you don't mess with Escobar.
Well, and you were also part of that. Escobar knew about you, and he knew about the DEA, and there was at least once, maybe more, threats on your life. And in fact, the U.S. government tried to bring you home, but you refused.
Yes, there were several instances where there were alleged threats, alleged contracts put on my life. And not only my life, but other agents. Yeah, but I was kind of like the focus because I was the head honcho of the DEA in Colombia. And the State Department wanted me out because the ambassador would say, I don't want your blood in my watch. DEA, same thing. The guy I replaced in Colombia left Colombia with threats on his life. And that's one of the reasons they took him out. And my argument was, you know, we're asking these Colombians to do our work, to do the dangerous part of the work, you know, the operation. They're getting killed left and right. And you're going to take me out because there's a threat against my life? How am I going to look at them in the face? How am I going to, you know, how is DEA going to ask them to do the stuff that I'm not willing to face? And luckily for me, I was able to convince them, and they left me there. Let me just touch on something else. There was a period in 1989 where Escobar killed the presidential candidate, Galan. And the same day that he killed Galan, he had the chief of police in Medellin killed. And after that, the U.S. ambassador and myself went to see the president of Colombia and asked him to react to this thing. And at the time, President Barco, who was in office, called all the law enforcement agencies, the military, to go after Escobar. And for a very short period of time, Escobar was, I mean, I felt we were going to get Escobar because for a change, we had a complete war on the Medellin cartel. And there were raids going on every day. Every place we knew that he was associated with was being raided. We were pretty excited about this. Escobar's reaction was he put a bounty on cops in Medellin, $1,400 a head. And in a period of about 4 months, 300 cops were assassinated in Medellin. And I mean, 300 cops being assassinated, some of them with their kids in a park, and somebody would go and just shoot them behind the head. It was a horrible time, horrible time. And yeah, I'll never forget that. I mean, I had so many meetings with the cops. Some weekends there'd be, 25, 30 cops killed in one city, different locations. Off duty, some on duty. It was a nightmare.
The more that we talk about your story and what you faced in Colombia, the more I am amazed about what you accomplished and what you did. And it's breathtaking. I think a round of applause for what you have done. And we're not done. we're not done. There's lots more to the story. I just think it's unbelievable. And you mentioned that you thought maybe you wouldn't step up, but I think you've demonstrated over and over again that your willingness to be in the face of that terror and danger.
I think I would have stepped up, but I would have questioned my decision. So,
Well, let's go back to the private prison because I think that's a fascinating time. You were hot on the chase, hot on the tail of Pablo Escobar. He turns himself into the Colombian government, and that's not a day of celebration for your team.
very unusual for law enforcement. We knew he was trying to turn himself in. So for several weeks, we were trying to do everything we could to prevent his surrender, which is kind of bizarre for a law enforcement agency. And so we were trying to do everything we could to scare the hell out of him from surrendering. He surrenders himself. We're devastated. We thought we lost because the president of Colombia, President Gaviria, gave in to every request that he made, every condition that he made, and gave him what he wanted. And the following months, we knew that he was running everything from the prison. He was going in and out. His labs were still operating. Dope was being manufactured everywhere. Was produced everywhere. We were still making huge seizures from his organization. It was a horrible day. The day he escaped from the prison, we all partied. The hunt was back on. You don't hear that much from law enforcement people party with a...
Okay. Tell me the circumstances. Why did he leave? That sounds like a pretty safe place to be, and he was in control of it. Why did he end up leaving the prison?
He made a mistake. Let me explain a little bit about the Medellin cartel. Medellin cartel, you have Pablo Escobar and the Ochoa brothers and Rodriguez Gacha, and those are the heads of the hierarchy of the Medellin cartel. And right below that, under that umbrella, you have major organizations that are operating under that Medellin cartel. And these organizations run their own operation. Most of them bought their own cocaine from Pablo Escobar. But they had their own distribution networks. They had all this stuff. So Escobar got wind that two families, the Moncada family and the Galeano family, which were major operators in Medellin as well, were cheating him because they were supposed to give him a percentage of everything that they exported to the United States. And they found out through some sources that they were not giving him the percentage that he deserved. So he invites him to the prison. He confronts them with this. He tortures them. They gave up the location where allegedly $30 million that they had was stashed. So he sent a couple of his goons from the prison to recover the money. They got the money. They got back. Now they had the money. So they decided to kill the heads of the Galeano and the Moncada family. And the story goes that they were chopped into little pieces, and their bodies were never found. And I don't know if they were taken out of the prison and dumped somewhere. Who knows? The bottom line is that this created a reaction from the families, the wives, and the other people in the organization. And they went to the press because they were looking for their husbands. They told them the last time they went, they knew about it, they went to the prison, the Catedral, to talk to Escobar. And so this put President Gaviria in a very uncomfortable position because he created the situation by caving into Escobar's demands. So Gaviria, instead of sending the police force to take over the prison and get Escobar out of there and move him to another prison, he sent a politician, a young 29-year-old deputy minister by the name of Mendoza, to ask Pablo Escobar if he would be willing to be transferred to another prison due to all the commotion that had been created by him. Escobar takes him hostage. And when he built the prison, Escobar had built double walls where he kept millions of dollars, he kept weapons, he kept drugs, whatever they wanted for an emergency situation. So he kept Mendoza, the vice minister, in the prison and left a couple of his guys guarding him. And then he and his closest associates that were with him in the prison, his bodyguards, they walked out of the prison. The military who was in the area allowed him to walk out, and he disappeared. And that's when the party began.
The party, you mean the hunt party?
The hunt party, yeah.
Okay. So at that point, now Escobar is on the run. You're on his tail, and you find a point of leverage with Escobar, and you had a fascinating meeting with a family member who visited the embassy, and you had a conversation with.
Yes, Escobar's son, who at the time I think was, I can't remember, 16, 17, 18 years old, came to the embassy asking to speak to the ambassador and request a visa for him, himself, and his sister, who was a few years younger, to go to the United States. The ambassador was notified that Escobar's son was at the embassy. So the ambassador called me and he said, "Joe, you're not going to believe who's here. But we got Ambassador's son. He wants to talk to me." He says, "No way I'm going to go talk to him. Do you want to talk to him?" So I said, "Of course I want to talk to him." So I went down and sat down with the young man. I was very impressed with his maturity. I mean, this young kid that has lived so much, he's seen so much. And bright. But I told him, there's no way you're going to get a visa to the United States. I told him basically, if you brought me the heads of in a platter of the Cali cartel, you still would not get a visa. And so that was my encounter with him. And shortly after that, there were many other efforts with other embassies, and we got intelligence from conversations that we were intercepting. Actually, the police was intercepting, not us, but they were shared with us about Escobar's efforts to try and get his family out of the country. So we keyed on that. We identified that as a weakness for Pablo Escobar. So we paid a lot more attention to the family, and we prevented the family from leaving the country. At one point, they got on a plane and went to Germany, and we learned about that they were going to Germany, so I put an agent on the plane and a cop. They flew to Frankfurt, Germany, and in the background, the ambassador, myself, the ambassador with the State Department, myself with DEA and the other law enforcement agencies, including German agencies, DEA headquarters, we all worked our butts off to try and get Escobar's family from not being allowed in the country. He was returned to Colombia. They were returned to Colombia, 3 of them, and this is where Escobar lost it. He stopped doing the little things he was doing that prevented our being able to locate him. Every time he got on his, they call them radio phones, every time he got on his radio phone, we were monitoring every conversation he had. He always got in a vehicle, he drove around. So the directional finding equipment that we were using to locate him was very difficult to pinpoint where he was at. And as soon as his family was returned from Germany, he went berserk. He called the presidential palace, making threats. He's calling everybody, the police and everything. And he's from one place, from one location. And that's how we found him. That's where he was killed.
So what are the circumstances leading up to that? You said he started making mistakes. He stopped.
He stopped moving around when he was on his phone. That was the one thing that was preventing our directional finding equipment from pinpointing where he was at.
And he was making a lot more contact.
He was talking to his son. He was talking to, he was threatening everybody. He was calling the police, calling the president, you name it.
And so, how did you end up finding him? You're tracking phone calls. One of your police force happens to spot him in a building.
We had undercover police vehicles with directional finding equipment. And so they were combing the Medellin area constantly, trying to pinpoint his location. But because of his moving around, it made it impossible. But on this occasion, it just happened that one of the units, which was run by a lieutenant who was the son of the commander of the Colombian task force in Medellin, he was operating the equipment, and as he's driving, he actually had eye contact with Escobar as he was on the phone looking out a window of a second-floor building in Medellin. And here we had him. Finally, we had him.
So what ensues? They spot Escobar. What are the next steps?
Okay. The lieutenant immediately notified his father at the command post in Medellin. The father immediately put together a group, and within minutes, they were at the location. And they surrounded the place. They forced themselves into the apartment. They found Escobar and the one person, one of his bodyguards that was with him, the only guy that he had with him. And Escobar decided to try and jump out the window into a one-story roof next to the place he was at. He had two weapons with him, and he's shooting back at the window he jumped from, not realizing that they were shooting at him from the street. And that's where they got him.
On the rooftop.
On the rooftop.
And that was the end of Pablo Escobar.
That was the end of Pablo Escobar and the end of his bodyguard. So.
And you weren't on site. You were.
No, I was in Bogota. I wish I would have been on site.
How did you react when you heard the news?
At first, I didn't believe it. The first call I got within probably a minute or two of the fact that he was killed, it was General Vargas, a great friend, a great cop, who was the guy in charge of the Colombian aspect of hunting Escobar. He calls me and he said, "I just got a call, they killed Pablo." And I said, "Are you sure?" Because, knowing the history of our failed efforts, "Are you sure it's Pablo?" He says, "Absolutely." He says, "We're sure it's Pablo." So I ran out of my office and I screamed as loud as I could so everybody, the agents would hear it. "Pablo is dead." Then I ran upstairs, told the ambassador, and came back, headed for the Colombian National Police. Champagne bottles were being, all over the place. We had a big party and big celebration. But it was a bittersweet celebration because there was a tremendous amount of euphoria, everybody hugging each other, everybody giving each other high fives. Finally did it. And then it kind of sinks in because a big role in this hunt for Pablo Escobar was the fact that the Cali cartel was very involved in destroying the infrastructure of the Medellin cartel with the blessing of the Colombian government.
So the Cali cartel, competitive with the Medellin cartel, they want to get rid of Pablo Escobar. They helped to get rid of Pablo Escobar, but now a new cartel is in power.
Well, the Cali cartel was pretty impressive, and it was a huge cartel, but they wanted the monopoly. And without Pablo, they would not have only 15% or 20% or whatever they had. They would have the whole show. So it was a bit bittersweet, you know, and then I remember very vividly, I knew some of the Colombian officers that were celebrating this. They were in the payroll of the Cali cartel. So as I'm looking around up there, I'm seeing this guy's, you know, just joyous, and I say, "You son of a," I'm not going to say it, but
Guns.
so yeah.
Well, it's a fascinating story, and you weren't done. You were done with your work there, but you still made some headlines with some follow-up stuff. I'm going to ask you about that, but I first want to ask you, as you look back on this whole experience, you were there for about 7 years. Is that correct?
6 years and 8 months plus.
Okay, and you thought initially it would take a couple years. You had a 3-year assignment. You'd get rid of Escobar. 6+ years later, you finally bring him down. As you look back, are there things that you could have done differently or more strategically to bring him to justice sooner?
You know, one of the problems, we were extremely rich in intelligence. We had a vast network of informants, not only in Colombia, but we had informants in the U.S., primarily in Miami, that provided us with a lot of good information. L.A., you know, I mean, New York. And we had the wiretaps. We were being bombarded with intelligence constantly. And there was never a moment where you could just lay back and just rest and kind of try and look at the picture in a broader sense. So we were constantly reacting, and everything was time sensitive. You know, so you couldn't. We have to respond. So it was just go, 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 go. And the one thing that I wish I had was the time to think a little more, plan a little more, strategize a little more, and come up with strategies to try and set a trap for Escobar in a more sophisticated way. And even though I stayed up all night thinking about it, you know, we didn't have time. We just didn't have time.
When you were leaving after that situation, you had some intelligence that the Cali cartel supported the election of the new president, and you gained a little notoriety because you did a couple things to tell the world that was happening, and some people weren't very happy about that.
Yeah, actually, I was in Washington when this took place. A politician paid the ambassador a visit, and he said there was a campaign going on. There was a presidential race going on at the time, and he handed the ambassador some tapes involving the campaign manager of the opposition party, not of the other party, not the party of the guy that walked in the ambassador's office with us, indicating very clearly that they were seeking financial support from the heads of the Cali cartel for the campaign. I mean, this was not surprising, because I think this has been going on for years with other campaigns in Colombia. But God, we had evidence. We had conversations, you know. So the next day I came back to Colombia, and the ambassador called me in and he says, "Joe, I want you to listen to this." And so I listened to it. I said, "My God," you know, I said, we have the goods on this guy. And because the parties were being identified and stuff like that in the tapes. So the ambassador said, "I'm going to take this to the then president, President Gaviria, and share this with him. The problem is that Gaviria was not of the same party. I mean, he was of the same party as the man that was caught on the tapes. So politically, this was a tough one to swallow for him, and she did that, and President Gaviria told the ambassador that he would take care of it. This was horrible. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. Well, nothing was ever taken care of. So it was obvious that nothing was going to happen. The State Department was not going to press the issue with the government. So I got these tapes, and I'm frustrated as heck. What are we going to do with these tapes? So I approached the journalist from the Dallas Morning News that I had befriended in Colombia. And he'd been there a few years, and I told him, hey, I want you to listen to this. Get it out on the newspaper in Dallas. And he got all excited, and his bosses said, we're not going to touch this. We're just not going to touch it. So the next choice, I had befriended a journalist who was, she was actually an anchor woman in a news station in Colombia. So I met with her, and I gave her the tapes without telling anybody. I'm kind of rolling the dice on this one. And so she took the tapes and put them in the news that same day in the evening. Big scandal. Of course, the condition was that she was not to divulge ever who gave her the tapes.
Source.
The source, So it created a big scandal. Still, the thing was, nothing happened. He was elected president. I was very frustrated about this. I was being reassigned to San Francisco as the special agent in charge in San Francisco. And about that time, IGT in Reno, Nevada, contacted me, and they said that they were expanding to Latin America, and they wanted to offer me the job of director of corporate development for Latin America to help them navigate through all of the drug money and all the minefields that exist in Latin America, because they were afraid to lose their license if they got jammed up with somebody that some unsavory character. So I decided that even though I love what I was doing, retire from DEA, take the job, and spill the beans in Colombia. Before leaving Colombia, I contacted another journalist, one of the TV stations, and I told him, I'll give you an exit interview, because he was always after me to try and get me to interview with him. I'm leaving. I said, with one condition, that you do not disclose or you not put this interview on the air until I'm on a plane on my way to Colombia. And what he thought it was going to be a 5-minute interview, it turned out to be a long interview. And basically I told him, your country's becoming a narco-democracy. Your sitting president his campaign has been financed with drug money from the Cali cartel. Got on a plane, and so created a big international.
A little more of a storm. Why not just do a little bit more?
Yeah, the bad part about that is when I got to Reno and I had reported to IGT, I almost didn't have a job because they were afraid they were going to put a bomb at the IGT building. So,
and fortunately, that did not occur.
No, I convinced them to let me. I said, "Give me a chance to show you what I can do." So I went back to Latin America for 2 weeks. I came back, reported, gave them a report, and they said, "Okay, we'll keep you. We'll take a chance."
That's a good decision. Okay, one last thing, and then we're gonna open this up to some questions from the live studio audience here at eHub. This, as we've had a chance to talk, this was the most rewarding detail of your career, and it's not hard to see why. But what was it that made you so good at your job and so committed to what you wanted to accomplish?
It was the most rewarding by far. I mean, I had a great career. I worked in Europe. I worked in Rome, Italy for a year, 4 years in Madrid, Washington, D.C., San Antonio, Dallas, San Diego. You know, I've had great assignments, great opportunities, but this was by far the best because it was the most challenging. But throughout my career, you know, I didn't go to college to be a DEA agent. I started, my first major was engineering, then architecture. I switched my major to architecture. And I didn't have a vision. I knew I was going to be a lousy architect. So I had some family members that were lawyers, and they said, maybe you should try law school. So I said, okay. So I changed my major to criminology. Got married when I was a senior in college at Cal. And so law school was kind of forgotten. I decided, heck, criminology, I'll apply to the Secret Service. You know, I had no idea what the Secret Service did. I thought it was just like James Bond. But, you know,
it is.
It isn't. But anyway, so I was intent on being a Secret Service agent. And I applied and went through the whole process. They passed everything. When interviews, they said, well, you know, we'll hire you, but you can't come for another 8 or 9 months because we don't have an opening for you. But we'll contact you and you'll come over. So in the meantime, I decided there was an opportunity to go with U.S. Customs as an agent, and I took that job. Both jobs were in the Treasury Department, so it would be a normal transfer from Customs to Secret Service, no problem. So I started my career in San Diego working the border, and once I got a taste of working narcotics, I loved it. I mean, I loved the excitement. I loved the adrenaline run. I had found my niche by accident. And when the Secret Service called me, 8 or 9 months later, I was hooked. I wasn't going anywhere. And then in 1973, when DEA was created, since my specialty was narcotic smuggling, working with U.S. Customs, I was automatically transferred to DEA, and everything turned out well.
Would it be fair to say that the foundation of your success was this passion that you found for your work?
Absolutely. I was so passionate. To this day, I mean, I've been away from the job for, almost 30 years. And I'm still passionate about DEA. I mean, I think the key to success in any career you have is passion. You have to be passionate. Otherwise, you'll just flounder around, you go with the surf, whatever, but you have to be passionate. And I think that's what makes a huge difference.
Well, Joe, let me just say that you're a hero, you're a legend, and on behalf of all of us here at eHub and anyone listening, we could not be more grateful for all that you've done. Thank you.
Well, thank you, but I'm not a...
Thank you for listening to the Know Your Ship podcast presented by eHub. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.